Hey everyone, today we'll be learning how to make basic API calls using the Retrofit 2 library in Android Studio. Now, the first thing to understand is what is an API call. An API call is um, just a signal that we send to a server, and it's a very coded signal in which we have to tell the exact address of that server, so that would be the base URL, and we have to tell what the RESTful API is to kind of define what sort of method we're targeting, and lastly we might want to give it some data. And so that is essentially what an API call is in more abstract terms. Um, okay, and a retrofit library or retrofit 2 library is essentially just a very type strict library which we're using largely because it's really nice, it's really well supported, but also because it helps mirror a lot of things that we have already seen in or we'll be seeing in Spring Boot. So it is going to be very modular as you go along, and adding newer classes to it is going to be, as you'll see, far easier, or additional interfaces. So um, how do we make API calls? Well, there are a couple of things involved in it. The first thing is we need to add the dependencies. So we need to tell Gradle what sort of libraries are going to be involved in the creation of this thing. The second thing that we have to do is seek permission from the manifest. So we'll be using internet, and as I said in one of my earlier videos, that every time you're making use of some hardware, you kind of have to inform your Android device in some way, and that's what a manifest does. And the rest of this is going to go into making the actual call. Um, as I said, that when we're exchanging messages with an external server, we do need to have some sort of coded objects. So we're going to be creating models. So whatever we're getting, we can actually understand what that is. So classes to reflect however the data is. And we're going to be creating, learning how to make an API client class and how to create an interface to kind of define the methods, or let's say the RESTful APIs that we'll be targeting. Okay, so that's about it. These are some of the code snippets that we're going to be using. I got these largely from Android Studio's documentation and from Retrofit's documentation. Android Studio you guys can look up on your own. For Retrofit you can look at this one, and we're going to be using the JSON placeholder.typicode, and you can look at their documentation on this link, which is everything should be available in the description, to see how we're going to be actually making an API call without an external server, without a server running, a Tomcat server running on our computer, because right now we don't. So we're just going to be using this server. The server is on this address, https jsonplaceholder.typicode.com, and it is using an API of /post/1. So these are, and this is a get post. Whenever we enter something into a browser and we get this, it's a get post. And this is object, has a user ID, an ID, a title, and body, and we kind of need to model it somehow. So okay, so let's get started. Let's create a new project. So let's start with empty activity. Next. So as you read the documentation for Retrofit, you realize you can't use anything 4.4 or below. The Java is perfect. We're going to be using one of the recent versions, as all Android Studio apps do. But anything under, I think, Java 8.0 is not allowed. And we'll be saving everything in this folder. It already has a bunch of stuff. Okay, let's delete this. basic API, and okay, finish, and we let that run. And one of the first things that we'll need to do in testing out the API call is set up some sort of something to actually see if we're getting anything out of it. So the first thing that we should be doing is probably creating a target text view so that we can actually view whatever we're getting from the API call that we're making. So once this loads up, should be any time. We're going to start working on that, and probably not take this long on your computers because it's a little bit slow, but yeah, the steps are fairly laid out. Just something to note, and I think I'll mention the error when it gets to it, but if you're having trouble connecting to the internet, it just might be that you've sought the permission from the manifest at a later point. And so in that case, you might want to run your emulator and uninstall the app on it and just reinstall it, and that should get it working. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be going to build.gradle, and this is where we add the dependencies. Okay, so the first thing to add dependencies is, as you can see, those are identically named files, and let's look at the time, 7 minutes. Okay, so is that do not place your dependencies where it says do not place dependencies there. Okay, we're going to place the dependencies over here where it says dependencies, and it's not being angry at us. And the dependencies are essentially two things. One is a JSON converter, which essentially tries to convert the JSON that we're getting from online into an object form that can be stored inside our Android app, or be received and be responded to. So this is a JSON converter, and this is a retrofit. This is essentially the generic client, API client that we're importing. So these are the two things that we need. And the next thing we need to do is just go to the manifest and seek permission. So this is permission, Android name, tell it we want to use it for the internet, and that's about it. So we've going to build Gradle now, and this is going to take a little while, but in the meanwhile we can actually go to the layout and try to target this box. So this is where we want our API calls to be received, and I think, as I've said in previous videos, we put in an ID which we can actually recall. So in this case, we're going to prefix it with the activity name, which is activity main / text view 1. And I think it has been refactored. Okay. And sync now. The Gradle is still running. Okay. And over here we're going to actually try to see if we can find the reference of the text view. So text view API text API text 1. So this is where we want our API call to be displayed, is equals to import class, and just to make sure we get the right one, find view by ID and r.id activity main / text view. So we have the reference to the text view we were looking at. So that's good. Um, the next thing that we want to do is we want to actually to communicate with the external server. We need to, so just to be clear, this is the API call that we're making. We're making a get call with this as our base URL and this as /post/1 as our the API and REST API, and this JSON is what we should be receiving, and this is essentially a post. So let's try to create a class to kind of mirror what we're seeing over here. So let's do that. Class post, and I actually am not good at remembering these things. I'm just going to copy paste this thing, and in BSC there's actually an extension which lets you do this for free without having to type all of this, but we're just going to try to mirror this. And so anybody who understands API calls knows that an API call, when it comes in, it has a bunch of stuff on it. It has a message, it has a code, it has a lot of things, and your actual response is inside the body. And so one of the first things that I realize is kind of problematic for me is that I don't want there to be body. But how would you communicate if you change the name to something else when your JSON is going to have a body here? And that's where a very useful method that hopefully we can is called serialize name, and this actually is going to help us tell precisely what we want to see in the JSON, how we want the JSON serialized, and we just say body, and now we can name it whatever we want. So let's call it, as you can see in the body, we're actually getting a large amount of text. Let's call it big text. So now we have all the basic data we need, but we still can't really access any of it, so we need getters and setters for it to actually work. So we right click, we go to generate, and we go to setters and getters, and we just select all of them. And so at this point in time, you'll start noticing that our basic 15-page application has actually become 61-page and 61 line, sorry, a 15 line Java class has turned into a 61 line behemoth, and it's already starting to look a little weird. But and that's something to think about. In the next video, we're going to be talking about how we modulate the entire code, so that in this particular activity you don't need to concern yourself with more than just a few lines of code to actually make the API call rather than all of this. And yeah, so now we have added the dependencies, we've sought permission from the manifest, we've created the models. Now we create an API class. So how do we do that? That's fairly simple. It's actually in the reference code you can actually see how to do that. So I'm going to So do we know the base URL? Yes, we do. So the base URL is this. This is and next we need to tell the API client how we're going to be converting all the data, what sort of JSON converter we'll be using. So this is as you'll see, it's very basic preliminary information it needs. So we have to tell it the add converter factory. So add Oh, it's not giving me the clues for some reason. We have this class. Oh, retrofit doll builder. Okay. So it's just one of those things where it would have been better to just copy paste this whole thing. And let's see if oh, it's capital B. So you can just copy paste this whole thing. And we have okay. So we have a new API client, right? And the API client knows how to convert the data it's getting from the JSON into this, and it knows what base URL to use. The first thing that you're going to notice is that it doesn't know about the REST APIs. So how Retrofit library works is that you need to use an interface. So let's create one. So we create an interface, and let's name it something that would make sense. So let's call it post API. And in this, we describe precisely the details of the calls that we're supposed to make. So this is going to be something a little bit on the technical side, but there's a couple of ways we can make these API calls. They can be get, they can be post, they can be put, they can be delete. In this one, we're just trying to make a get call. So let's make a get call, and the REST API is supposed to look something like /post /1 oh, they had a slash at the end of it. So if the base URL had a slash at the end of it, we don't need this. So, and the next thing is, do we know what data type we're getting? We do, right? We've created a post, and it's going to come as a call. So you get a post, and we're going to call it get first post, and that's it. Hover over call, import the class, and make sure we do the retrofit library, and save, and gradle build. I'm actually going to have this running at this point. So at this point, we have an interface. How do we use that interface? So this thing is fairly simple. Post API is equals to, and this is where our precise API client is coming in. So retrofit dot create and over here we describe the exact interface that we're using. So we say post API, and it wants that as a class. So there we have it. Now since we've used the post API interface, we can actually call this method get first post. So let's do that. So API client dot get first post, and this is where we get the call. So there is a way to execute it, but it's not allowed in Android Studio anymore. And so maybe I should talk about that a little bit. The reason why it's not allowed is that it doesn't want you making API calls on the main thread, because it doesn't want the main thread getting blocked, right? So it wants it to be getting made somewhere in the background, in between a lot of other processes. So how we do that is we actually send it a function. We give it a callback function, and what the callback function essentially does is it saves whatever instructions we've said should be done, and it puts it in a queue. And once it's inside a queue, then whenever it gets times between its thread, it's going to be executing that in the background without blocking our app. So that's something really important for us. So let's use the enqueue function. And what is the argument over here? It's called the callback post. So let's see what that is. New callback post, retrofit. So this callback function is essentially saying that once your turn comes in the queue and it's time for us to process your stuff, what do you want us to do? So on response, what do you want us to do? On failure, what do you want us to do? This is something that we can actually utilize. Use to log our failures by using throw, or by using t. And over here we can on success you can actually tell it that we want this API text1 to API text1 to reflect what we want to see. So dot set text, and this is the response that we're getting. So we say response dot, so as I said, response comes in body, and in the body, since we can't just put JSON in there, or maybe we can, or we can, but I'm just still going to be using one of this stuff that we had in. So we can either get our ID, title. Let's get the big text so we actually see what's going on. Let's set the big text, and let's rebuild this app. Be doing on time, 23 minutes. Okay, longer than I would have liked, but yeah, as you saw, okay, so the app was running, and so it kind of needs to terminate it so it can kind of install everything again and get started again. So as you saw, that we kind of had to create this model for our computer to understand what we're getting, and this is already over 90 lines. And then we had to create an interface to tell precisely what sort of a REST API we're targeting, and then we had to create our main API client, and then we had to use the interface to get all the methods we want from that client, and then we call upon this method get first post and enqueue our request and send a callback function where we're telling precisely what we want to be done. So we started off with 15 lines of code, and now it's around 95 lines of code, and it's like 80 lines of it. And later on we're going to see how to make this entire call in a single line. There we go. So this is what we saw in the get post, and hopefully if you follow this through the next video, and you can, by the way, find all this code on GitHub, if you follow this to the next video, you'll see how we can organize the whole thing and make the entire call in just one line. Thank you.